What's up, basketball fans? Welcome to the Warriors Report. It's time to talk about the Toronto Raptors because there's some big news yesterday regarding their head coach, and it was being reported by Shams Charania that the Toronto Raptors have fired coach Nick Nurse. Sources tell The Athletic. Now, for anyone that does not follow the Toronto Raptors, this may come as a surprise, but for anyone that has followed the Raptors even a little bit over the last couple seasons, you know this was coming. There are several things to talk about that led to the firing of Nick Nurse. And yes, I'm going to be talking about Ime Udoka as well, who's rumored to be a leading candidate for the Toronto Raptors head coaching duties. And I'm also going to be speaking of the ugly truth that actually came out about Nick Nurse as well. So if you're ready to watch this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you wish to hit the subscribe button as well, that would be very much appreciated. So with that being said, let's get into today's video. Now, the Toronto Raptors came into the season with very high expectations. I mean, why would they not? They had Rookie of the Year Scotty Barnes. They had two veterans who have won the championship in Pascal and Fred, and then they had a lot of young talent. But the Raptors season did not go as expected. They finished 41-41, and they finished 10th in the Eastern Conference, which took a lot of people by surprise because the talent was clearly there. Now, I know while many fans will point to the front office's roster construction issues as the leading cause of why the Raptors did not succeed this season, there are several things to take into consideration when we talk about what led to firing of Nick Nurse. First things first is we have to talk about the Raptors organization as a whole. And when you look at how they have improved steadily over the years, that has been done not through free agency because they're not a team that attracts a lot of free agents. In fact, you can see that for a lot of teams. But the way the Raptors have improved, when you look at guys like Pascal, when you look at guys like Fred, OG Anunoby, even Norman Powell, even though he's not on the Raptors anymore, is they have developed players through their system. And although Nick Nurse was brought in to win the championship, which he did, and all the credit goes to him, since he's taken over his head coaching duties, he hasn't really developed those players. Now, this hurts the Raptors because if you're not attracting free agents and if you're not developing talent, then all of a sudden you become a stagnant team. Now, obviously, for a team like the Toronto Raptors, this was by no means an easy decision to let go of a good head coach in Nick Nurse, but it was obvious that the front office and coach Nick Nurse did not see eye to eye. This was something I had highlighted in several videos where I said it completely. Obviously, they do not see eye to eye because you see Nick Nurse not playing the bench at all, and you see him benching even really good young players like Precious Achiuwa, whereas Masai Ujiri obviously focuses on the development of some of the young guys. And let's be honest, if the Raptors had not fired Nick Nurse, then all of a sudden this roster is not improving because not only are the veterans aging, now the young players are not getting better and they're going to get older as 23, 24, 25-year-olds. And then all of a sudden you have wasted a lot of time investing into them, but also not developing them as well. Now, regardless of how you may feel about guys like Delano Banton and Malachi Flynn, you have to acknowledge that the Raptors, whether or not they develop good role players, they also want to build up the value of some of these young players, and Nick Nurse has not done that. So when you build up the values, that allows you to facilitate trades where you can get further picks, you can get different types of players in return. But this all of a sudden put the Raptors in a very tough situation where the veterans were playing good, but they weren't playing together, and the young players were clearly frustrated. Now, there's a story that came out which I really want to talk about regarding Nick Nurse. And shout out to Raptors Update that had posted this. And this went on to state that Nurse sent an assistant coach home and told him not to accompany the team on an upcoming road trip after an altercation early in the new year. In the caption, it also went on to state Earl Watson was apparently missing from the bench on January 2nd versus the Pacers. According to sources, after an altercation early in the new year, Nurse sent an assistant coach home and told him not to accompany the team on an upcoming road trip without the prior knowledge or permission of Ujiri. The assistant missed one game, and Ujiri later smoothed things over, but the relationship between the coaches was described as tense for the duration of the season. This was being reported by Josh Lewenberg. Now, of course, we don't know the details of what happened between the two coaches and Nick Nurse and the assistant coach, but for a coach to do something like this, it just seems very unprofessional. This is something that high school kids would do. And look, Nick Nurse and Dwayne Casey had their disagreements as well. This was very obviously highlighted after Nick Nurse was hired as head coach, but you never saw Dwayne Casey do something like this. Now, of course, this is a little bit embarrassing because I don't know what happened to Nick Nurse. He came into the Raptors organization through Dwayne Casey as an assistant coach and then became the head coach. And he was this innovative guy, box and one. We saw everything that he did during the playoffs. But then all of a sudden, the last couple seasons, it's almost as if that innovative coach that we knew in Nick Nurse stopped developing young players, stopped getting creative with how he likes to do things. And I mean, it really just kind of went away from what he was known for, being this awesome mad scientist that a lot of people like to call him. And now he's just kind of been more frustrated with Raptors. And even this season, he did not look engaged at all. You didn't see the Nick Nurse squatting down, being engaged in game. You saw the Nick Nurse arguing with refs and arguing to the point where he got teed up many times and arguing about foul calls as well. And it just seemed like there was a lot of frustration boiling on from his end. Now, I don't know if the rumors are true about him checking out. Again, it's easy for a lot of us to say we truly do not know what he's going through, but you've got to wonder what Nick Nurse was going through. I mean, he's making $8 million, and you have to do everything in your power to help a talented team like the Toronto Raptors win, and he didn't. And look, ultimately, he paid the price. And there are several things to talk about as well. I want to quickly highlight one more thing before we speak about Ime Udoka. Now, one of the biggest things I took away from Masai Ujiri's press conference was that Nick Nurse, obviously firing Nick Nurse, but also he wanted someone that can come in and create a culture for the Toronto Raptors. And I actually got flamed for posting this somewhere in a Raptors bleachers report where I said, you know what, Nick Nurse is a good coach, but you really got to appreciate what Dwayne Casey created here with Pound the Rock. That was something he created, and the culture just took off there. When you saw the Raptors under Dwayne Casey, what you saw was a team that played not only really well together, but every time a player fell down, everybody ran to that player to pick them up. You didn't really see that with Nick Nurse, even during the championship run. I mean, obviously, we had Kyle Lowry. We still had some of the faces from the Dwayne Casey era, but you didn't see teammates behave the same way. Sure, they won a lot of games, but it just wasn't the same culture. You saw the culture slowly fade, and it's obvious. A team needs an identity, a team needs a culture, and it was obvious that Nick Nurse wasn't really about that. He was all about winning. And I think ultimately there are several factors like this which contributed to Masai Ujiri firing Nick Nurse, a lack of development for young players, not being engaged. He clearly looked like he didn't want to be there. And then he made those comments right before the Philly game, which was a huge distraction for the Toronto Raptors. And then this story comes out about him sending an assistant home. And then when you add up everything, it makes sense as to why the Raptors had to let go of Nick Nurse. Again, whatever the situation was, it just seemed like his head wasn't in the Raptors this season. Again, I know it's easy for me to say this, but it just seemed like he wasn't really there. He wasn't focused. He wasn't the Nick Nurse that's squatting down, engaged in game. This was a Nick Nurse that was yelling at referees, would go sit in benches, be really frustrated with some of the way that his players played. So again, I don't know how you guys feel. I think it was the time to move on from Nick Nurse. I really appreciate what he has done for the Raptors organization, but just some of the things that I found with him, that culture thing was big for me because the Raptors took so many years to build that culture that Dwayne Casey did. And shout out to Dwayne Casey. I know he didn't get the credit he deserved, but he built that up. And Nick Nurse took over and obviously won the championship. But we really need a culture. We need a culture reset. And now we're going to get it with a new coach, potential new coach. And I want to talk about Ime Udoka as well, because the Raptors are being rumored as someone that could potentially hire Ime Udoka. Now, first of all, I really like Ime Udoka, but I do want to say one thing before we talk about his connections with Masai Ujiri is that if people are expecting Ime Udoka to come in and all of a sudden develop some of the young guys, that may not happen. He's actually very similar to Nick Nurse in the sense that he's very tough. He's a very tough coach. He's going to let the players know it. I mean, he maybe holds the players a little bit more accountable than Nick Nurse, which is good to see. He's very defensive orientated. So again, you could argue that maybe you want a more offensive minded coach. But again, it's easy to see that he has a successful season with the Boston Celtics team that had a superstar in Jason Tatum and also a really good player in Jaylen Brown as well. So again, I don't want to take anything away from Ime Udoka. I think he's a fabulous coach. But you really got to question, like, is he going to come in and solve all of the issues with the Raptors? Is he all of a sudden going to develop Precious Achiuwa and all of the young guys as well? So he's a really good head coach. I like him. Obviously, Masai has ties with him. He interviewed him before Nick Nurse was officially hired as head coach for the Toronto Raptors. And obviously, Ime is someone that was under Coach Popovich as well, who's obviously one of the best coaches of all time. So again, it's very interesting. I wouldn't be against the hiring of Ime. I think he could definitely unlock a lot of potential with the Raptors veteran guys and even Scotty Barnes. But again, if you're expecting him to come in and fix everything, I don't necessarily think that will be the case. But again, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts about this whole Nick Nurse situation, especially this one where he sent an assistant coach home. It just seemed like Nick Nurse's, unfortunately, ego just grew over the years, and I don't blame him. He came in first season, wins a championship. Next year, wins Coach of the Year. So again, it just seemed like his ego was building up, and it just seemed like he was he stopped being that innovative coach. Again, that's just my take. It's a little bit frustrating to see Nick Nurse go, but I think it was the right decision. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comment section below. And as always, guys, yes, I do have a trivia question for you today. And that trivia question is, where does Nick Nurse rank in most wins during the regular season in Raptors history? Is it A first? Is it B second? Is it C third? Or is it D fourth? So whoever answers this trivia question correctly first in the comment section gets a shout out in my next video. So that will be it for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you guys have yourselves a great day.